Hey Geekscapers, Tessa Markle here from Femme Regard Podcast, and I am here to talk to you guys about NickToons. It is the anniversary of the beginning of NickToons, which first aired on August 11th, 1991.
This Sunday, why face the nation when you can face the animation?
I am so grateful that I grew up in the golden age of NickToons. I'm a huge fan of so many of their shows. As you can see, member of the Midnight Society. If you guys remember Are You Afraid of the Dark? That show totally spawned my love of horror. Probably gave me a lot of nightmares, but definitely one of my favorites. To get back to the beginning, I was born in '89, so I was really just hitting the NickToons as they were coming out onto the market. And you know, I was a little young maybe for some of them in the very beginning, but by the time that I was really cognizant of what I was watching and finding my favorite shows and stuff, the still kind of original generation but newer Nicktoons were starting to come out, and I was still, young enough to catch the next generation of Nicktoons and love them. And I just want to talk about why I love them so much, because I think for all of us there's this nostalgia, and we love going back and watching these old shows, but why? Why did we love them so much to begin with? And I think that Nickelodeon really did this unique thing with their shows in that they made them so relatable. It's almost genius how they did that, because you look at a show like Rugrats, they're infants. How do you relate to infants, And then you look at a show like Angry Beavers, they're beavers. How do you relate to beavers, And they did such a really good job though of telling these jokes that so many different ages could appreciate. I look at a show like Rocko's Modern Life, okay? That came out a little bit later, but still early 90s. I loved Rocko and my dad loved Rocko. It would come on and I'd be like, Dad, Rocko's on. It's something we bonded over. And the jokes were anyone from age, 7 to age 47 could appreciate these jokes. And that takes a genius. I honestly, seriously appreciate kids shows where the jokes are just as funny for the adults. And it's sure, maybe there's some jokes that are extra corny for the kids, or some jokes that maybe are a little over the kids' heads, and that's why the adults love them. But there's so many jokes that are just genuinely funny for both ages. And I love that. Nickelodeon did such a good job with that. But, Nickelodeon's whole thing in the beginning was creating TV for kids by kids. So sure, it wasn't kids that were writing it or, producing it or whatever, of course, but they were putting out content that kids actually wanted to watch, that kids actually found funny, that kids actually thought was cool. So let's go back to the beginning, to the original OG 3 Nicktoons that were coming out right after Nickelodeon hit it big with the first live action shows like Hey Dude and Salute Your Shorts and Pete and Pete, which I was also really big fans of all those. But we're here to talk about the tunes. So the first 3 that came out were Doug, Ren and Stimpy, and Rugrats. So let's look at each one. You've got Doug, right? And he's in middle school, and his best friend's kind of this really cool kid, but he's not really in with the cool crowd, and he's got this crush on this girl that's dream girl, but she's not the typical popular, cheerleader type. She's just the girl next door. And then you've got this bully that's basically a greaser, and you've kind of got everything in the show. You've even got Mr. Dink, the weird neighbor. You've got Judy, the beatnik sister. Everybody was kind of represented in that show, which was pretty cool. The main character, Doug, he was the everyman. He was kind of who we all were at that age to some degree. Whether we were, the dork or the popular kid or the athlete or whatever, there's some part of us that could relate to Doug. Because he really just wanted to do the right thing. He was always trying to do the right thing. He was just kind of messing up a lot along the way. He had a crush on this girl, and he was obsessed with his favorite band, the Beats. And he had all of these fantasies of him being a superhero, Quill Man, and, you know, just his mind was always going, you know, he had this imagination. And I think we can all relate to that, especially when we were that age. And I think that's why it was such an enjoyable show for everybody. There was, you know, every episode had something that people could relate to, but it also had just enough quirk that it made it fun. You know, like the yodeling. There's a lot of yodeling in that show. Just weird little things like that made it a cartoon, you know, it made it fun. I mean, let's talk about the beats. Like, I still love all of those songs. I honestly have looked them up on Spotify and just like rocked out to them. I'm not even kidding you. The level of nostalgia is real. But okay, so let's move on to Rugrats. Like I said earlier, how are babies relatable, right? But again, they had such active imaginations, which every kid has, you know, and it's something that I know I certainly haven't lost, but as you get older, you're more critical of it, you know? And Rugrats was a show that just really let you like dive into this fantasy world with them and daydream with them, you know? And it was relatable too, because sure, they were younger than you, they were babies, but you were probably a kid, so you were relating to the babies. I think about the one episode where they all want to be grown-ups, right? I know I wanted to be a grown-up when I was little, like so bad. Like I would literally pray, like, let me just be like 25. But in the episode, you know, they get to be grown-ups and then they have to like go to work and get fired and all of these things that are like the worst parts of being a grown-up, you know? And so it let you relate to it at any age that you were watching and expect to relate to it as an adult too, you know? Like, you're like, oh yeah, I bet that's what it is really like to be a grown-up, you know? And like I said, it has stuff for the grown-ups too. Because now as a grown-up, you go back and you watch that episode and you're like, huh, yeah, see what it's like? But the grown-ups in the show too, I think were so interesting. I love now going back and watching old episodes of the Rugrats and watching the grown-ups storylines, because they are fully fleshed out and amazing characters for real. Like, go back and watch if you haven't in a lot of years. It was jokes that I found funny as a kid, but like I find hilarious now as an adult, you know? And I love that they really did that with the grown-ups on the show. And it wasn't just like, you know, the Peanuts grown-ups that were wah, like not real characters, but they existed. Like the grown-ups were just as important of characters as the babies were. So now let's move on to Ren and Stimpy. I never really watched Ren and Stimpy a whole lot when I was little. I think I was a little too much of a goody two-shoes. I was like, that show's gross. I still think it's really cool that a show like that was on the air for kids, because we didn't get a lot of that as kids, you know? Like, we had to watch MTV that was meant for the teenagers if we wanted to get anything even close to risque. But Ren and Stimpy was such a cool show in that, like, it wasn't dirty. It wasn't adult humor. Like, it was for kids. But he was so just towing that line, you know? And it was great for the kids that were a little bit older, or the kids that did have a little bit more mature of a sense of humor. It just blows my mind that was on Nickelodeon that early. But I think that that's really, really cool that it was. And, you know, as the years went on and more shows joined the network, we got some really cool stuff. Like, Aw, Real Monsters was one of my favorites. And I loved that it was such a show about like celebrating being weird, you know? I think that's something that is kind of big now. You see it in a lot of cartoons now, but at the time, like that was pretty innovative. And I loved that about it, you know? And I loved that it was like not scary, but like weird and spooky. And I mean, I love everything kind of Halloween-y. And so that was a great show for me. Rocko's Modern Life, like I said, huge fan. Another one that was like borderline grown-up humor, but still meant for kids. Just, you know, getting away with it. Loved that. Loved that it was weird. And then, you know, a little bit longer or a little bit farther down the line, we had Cat Dog super fun show. Angry Beavers, love that show. If you were a ham of a kid like me and just loved to be loud and weird and performative, you were making all kinds of weird sounds from Angry Beavers. And then you had the Wild Thornberries. I loved the Wild Thornberries. I would have murdered a person to be able to have the ability to talk to animals. Like, I would have given anything to be Eliza Thornberry. That show's like even better to me now as an adult because I'm a huge Tim Curry fan, and he was Nigel Thornberry, which like, so many cool little like connections like that you look back on as an adult and you're like, that show is even cooler now. You know, eventually we worked our way up to SpongeBob. SpongeBob for me was kind of the end of like the golden Nicktoons era. I was just starting to get not too old to watch cartoons, but I was broadening my viewing a little bit. I was starting to watch sitcoms and stuff like that more. But Nickelodeon as well was starting to move a little more back into the live action vein. They were kind of turning more into the Disney vein of more preteen, I felt like, shows. I don't want to say SpongeBob ended it all because, listen, SpongeBob is the bomb too. And SpongeBob is still going, new episodes, which blows my mind. I mean, I have a goddaughter who is 4 years old and she loves SpongeBob and she doesn't think that I know SpongeBob and she'll like question me about it. And I'm like, girl, I can quote the first, 20 episodes. Don't test me. But that's what's awesome about it too is, not only does it bring you that nostalgia when you go back and watch it now, but I can still recite episodes. It's crazy. Like, I impress myself of how much I remember of all of these, and how much I have referenced it in everyday life. If anybody is around my age and we're talking about, I'm telling you, virtually any topic, I can relate it to a Nicktoon. I'm like, oh, do you remember that time in Hey Arnold when, this and this happened? And most of the time people are like, oh my God, yeah, I totally remember that episode. So it's something that, we were able to grow up with and have to relate to and have that was something, really for us, that got our humor, that got our intelligence. That was amazing. Like, Nickelodeon, man, they were geniuses, and they really found something golden in that age of Nicktoons. And man, I mean, if I had a kid, I would find the old Nicktoons to show them because what's on TV now isn't the same, and I learned so much from the Nicktoons too. There were so many cultural and historical references. I mean, in Hey Arnold alone, you could learn about opera and Shakespeare and Chinese checkers and like so many things. And it never felt like they were teaching you. You just learned. I learned all about Passover and Hanukkah from the Rugrats. It was such good programming that was genuinely made for kids, and I will never be too old to watch Nicktoons. I have so much fun going back and rewatching any of the shows. I get so excited when I get to talk about it with somebody because I think it's something that we just can all, relate to together. It's an experience that we all went through together and that we can bond over. And I can't believe that it's been so long since Nicktoons began, but I'm just really grateful that I grew up in that time and I got to experience the golden age of Nicktoons.